The definition of AI, especially when it comes to assessing technology, is relatively loose. We think about all of this through the lens of what is the problem that we want to solve for our customers, and what is the best use of technology to solve that problem. Like, that's the starting point. It's problem first, technology second. The great thing about AI is that we have more technology available to us to use and to pick from to go and best solve customer problems. But the focus is never on the technology. The focus is on what customer problems are we solving and how are we driving value to our customers. And the technology best suited to do that is the technology we'll choose.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Long Game. My guest today is Lucas Lovell, Director of Product at Paddle, a payment processing platform that helps you globally expand. In this episode, we talk a lot about what goes into being a SaaS founder, and specifically, when should you expand to other regions? If you launch in the US, when should you expand to Europe or other areas? And then also, how should you do that? Broadly speaking, you're leaving money on the table, but there's also complexities of taking tax, complying with local law, and a lot more. Lucas has a wealth of experience, having been a founder in Australia, as well as then moving to France and dealing with these international boundaries within companies. We also talk about AI, of course, my favorite topic, and get into what the future could potentially look like for payments with the emergence of AI, agents, maybe a little bit of LLMs, and so much more. Just all around kind of understanding the SaaS ecosystem and evolving patterns within the payment processing world. I learned a lot. I hope you do too. If you enjoy this, check out Lucas Lovell on LinkedIn, and hope you have a great day. Lucas, talk to me about the nature of SaaS at Paddle and what you're focused on.
Yeah, sure. So Paddle is a payments infrastructure platform. We work with thousands of software companies all around the world, many of whom are SaaS companies. And what we do is we help SaaS companies increase revenue, reduce cost, and reduce exposure to risk through end-to-end billing and payments under a merchant of record model. So the merchant of record model is a different model to what most people think of when they think of payments. So it's different to a direct sort of PSP integration, like a Stripe type of model, whereby Paddle takes on full liability for the transaction and therefore takes on a lot of the complexity of selling globally. From a compliance standpoint around things like sales tax first, but also broadly fraud and other sort of compliance components as well. So we make payments easy is the way we like to think about it. Using a merchant of record like Paddle, we're still capturing all your revenue. We're providing all of the payment services, but we are doing that in a way where we're technically reselling your product, which enables us to add a lot more value in terms of taking away a bunch of that sort of operational burden that can make it complex to sell internationally. So from a SaaS perspective, a lot of SaaS founders, we say a lot that SaaS is global from day one, and lots of SaaS founders have ambitions of selling globally very early on in the life cycle of their company because it's digital products, cloud-based digital products. And so we make that easy. We make it easy for companies to sell
That's
globally.
interesting too, that you pull, like, my immediate question is like, how are you different than Stripe? And then you just went straight into it. The fact that you are a merchant of record, I didn't realize that there was a difference, to be honest. So is that something that like every company that is using Stripe could use you guys, and then by using you guys, they kind of built-in compliance, internationalization, they can kind of expand more broadly?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So companies will typically choose between going down a Stripe route or a Paddle route. And so, yes, we provide the same service insofar as we capture payments. So you don't need to use Stripe and Paddle alongside each other, for example. They're very different products, but we do it under the banner of a merchant of record model, which enables us to do more around the transaction and take away a bunch of that complexity around sales tax. So what Paddle will do is that if you choose to use Paddle and you're trying to sell into a foreign market, say the UK, for example, we'll automatically collect and collect information on where the buyer is located. We'll then calculate sales tax based on their location. When that money hits our merchant accounts, we'll then make sure we remit all of that sales tax to the relevant authority and file on your behalf. so that none of that is something you have to even think about. So it's not just a tool to help you calculate sales tax or help you remit sales tax. It's actually saying, no, we're going to take all of that off your plate and actually do it for you. So that's where the added value comes in, and it's all in a single integration. So you're plugging into Paddle once, and you're getting all of that benefit out of the box, as opposed to cobbling together tools in a piecemeal type of setup, where you might be using Stripe to collect payments, and you're using Avalara to calculate tax, and you're using a different tool to sort of detect fraud and that sort of stuff. So all-in-one model, making payments easy, making selling international easy by removing a lot of that operational complexity that comes with it.
That's super cool. I didn't realize that that was out there. I always thought you had to roll your own. Obviously, I mean, maybe not obviously, but I'd say you're probably biased given you work there. That being said,
Sure.
you've been a SaaS founder before, right? So
I have been.
what does the decision process look like? And maybe less on which platform or tools you use, whether you roll your own and cobble together all the different pieces, or use a Paddle or a different merchant of record. But when do you decide to go internationally with a SaaS product? And you said earlier you could go from day one, but there's also a lot of complexity that comes with it. I know you've talked before about it's not just about doing the taxes and the compliance aspects, but you also want to make it feel like it's tuned to the market. You want to make sure that the pricing is relevant to the market, not just take your USD price and then convert it to rupees and then that's the price. Well, that's kind of tone deaf and not knowing your market. So you need to kind of think through a lot more things. So I would imagine small startups, it doesn't necessarily make sense, but there's obviously an inflection point at which in your journey, well, we can expand into markets. And so which ones we expand into, how do we do it? How do you do that reach? So what's that calculus look like?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think when I talk to especially early stage SaaS founders, we often talk about the distinction between being present in a market and being successful in a market, because it's easy to be present in a market from day one. You configure a bunch of things in a payments platform, you deploy your product globally. It doesn't add much complexity to launching a SaaS product or launching a digital product in order to make it sellable on a global scale, right? From a product perspective. I think there's a big difference though between sort of making that product available globally and being successful globally. And that's very much what the conversation centers around.
It's like checking the box versus actually making it relevant and good.
Exactly. Making it relevant and good is much more difficult. And there are many, many components to what we call localization, which is having an offering that is localized to that particular market, with the purpose of that being, I want to be as successful as possible as I can be in that market. So to talk through like a couple of those or a few of those different pillars, from a payments perspective, the obvious one is currency. So currency is a great way to localize in a certain market. So if you're selling into France or Spain, you want to make sure you're selling in euros. You don't have to.
Is that just necessary, or is that a choice? Like you could sell in USD in.
You could sell in USD, absolutely. You could sell in USD.
And then they
a
just
lot
get
of people
hit with
do.
a conversion rate or something.
Yeah. So, but you'll also get hit with a lower conversion rate through your checkout as well. So let's say you're a SaaS company deploying a PLG model, so product-led growth. Customers self-serve onto your product. If I'm in France and I land on a landing page of a SaaS product and everything is in USD, you're sending a message to me that you're not present in France, right? You're sending a message to me, a signal that actually you're a US company, not a French company. And yeah, a lot of people will still buy. Again, you're present in the market, but are you maximizing your success in that market? No. So we see all the data on companies that are localizing currency and those that aren't localizing currency. And there are multiple percentage points of a difference in conversion rates through a checkout funnel or through a buying funnel that you get from a localized currency experience. The other reason why people tend to not like purchasing in foreign currency, especially in subscription-based products, is that you're exposed to currency fluctuation because the price you're locked into is a USD price, which means based on how that exchange rate changes over time, you could be paying a different amount every month. Now, between Euro and the USD, it's not likely to change meaningfully, but you take that example and apply it in other markets and it's more meaningful. Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So that's a more pragmatic reason, but I think the bigger reason is you're just sending a message to your buyers that, you're not present in that market. It might not be important to you or critical to you. And I think currency is the first one. Language is another. right? Like you can sell in English all over the world if you'd like to. Um, what message are you sending to use the France example, to a buyer in France if you are presenting your buying experience in French? Just easier for them to get through, right? Lots of people in France, English is their second language. They're gonna feel more comfortable in a French buying experience that's in the French language. So
And
again,
it's
it's all
probably,
about signaling.
I would think it's like the comfort level, but then there's also a certain amount of, um, I mean, I guess it's maybe it's all just comfort, but it's less friction for a
Yep,
consumer to go through a process where they don't have to have as much cognitive load of translating something into a language, or maybe they're reading their second language, so it's not as comfortable, which again
yep,
probably impacts the funnel and the conversion rate through the entire experience.
completely, completely. And then to take the concept further again, you think about local payment methods. So, are you offering the right payment methods based on what buyers in that country want to pay in? So, I think in the US, in the UK, in Australia, where I'm originally from, credit cards are dominant, right? We tend to use cards that are on the Visa, Mastercard, Amex rails. That tends to be the sort of most highly adopted payment method. But if you look in other markets like China, cards are barely used at all, right? You look at a country like Brazil, and Pix as a payment method is the most prevalent in Brazil. North of 50% of transactions in Brazil are paid for with Pix when you're looking at general e-commerce. And there are different sort of buying habits based on sector, based on sort of SaaS, general consumer subscriptions, etc. But broadly, you need to be sort of positioning your product with the right payment methods to make that purchase experience easier. So it's exactly what you said, right? All of these things represent more and more of a sort of depth to your localization effort. And every time you localize against one of these pillars, be it currency, be it language, be it payment methods, be it pricing, right? All you're doing is adding percentage points to your conversion and adding percentage points to your likelihood of success because you're reducing friction and maximizing outcomes for your company. Pricing is a great example, right? So very, very few companies will price based on willingness to pay. Like willingness to pay is not the same globally. Most people assume it is. Most people
Which
will.
obviously maybe it's a self-explanatory term, but like what exactly do you guys consider willingness to pay when looking at this and figuring out a willingness to pay level?
Yeah, so willingness to pay, it's a good question. A strict definition of willingness to pay. Purchasing power. So it's a bit of a proxy for the wealth of the particular country and the general sort of like economic position that a country or a market is in terms of its ability and willingness to spend money on X, Y, or Z. So like
So it's
like
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 what
the
level
big
is
the
the
Big Mac
discretionary
index.
income of the average person or something type thing.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like the Big Mac index is a great example of this, where you can look at the data of how much does a Big Mac cost in every market around the world, right? And it varies quite a lot based on willingness to pay. But a lot of SaaS companies will set a US dollar price and just FX into every other major currency, um, and not adjusting pricing based on willingness to pay. So if you use USD as a baseline or the US as a baseline, if you go to the Nordics, willingness to pay can be 20-25% higher than what it is in the US. If you go to Brazil, it can be 20-25% lower. If you go to Eastern Europe, it can be 10-15% lower. If you go to Western Europe, it can be 10% higher. Um, and all of these things will impact your success in that given market. If you're trying to go to market in Brazil and you're pricing based on North American prices, right? You're probably going to struggle to capture that market in a way that's meaningful. So again, it's another layer to your localization effort, right? And I think you don't have to do any of it to sell globally. Technically, if you just want to be present, you can. And you have to be confident that there's ROI in making some of these decisions around how deeply should you localize. But ultimately, the companies that I see are most successful and reaching their full potential when they think about internationalization, when they think about globalization, um, or going global. They're thinking really deeply about how much effort do I need to put into each market to be successful there, which I think is a really important exercise for companies to go through.
I still come back to how do you actually make the decision of no or no go? And again, from a product perspective, right?
Yep.
So product roadmaps within SaaS and software is you have a list of things you want to build. You have a hypothesis as to how much impact that thing will do, right? Or move the needle, increase subscriptions, increase revenue,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And then how much effort is it? And so you kind of do that calculus in your head, and or not calculus, but just arithmetic, and say, we think this is
Yeah.
a reasonable chance of a positive ROI. If we build this feature, we'll get more customers, we'll decrease churn, whatever objective you're trying to hit.
Sure.
And so if I'm a SaaS company and I have $1 million in
Yeah.
ARR or something, does it make sense for me to expand to one region, to all, to localize in one of them, to hyper localize?
Mhm.
Like, how do you figure out how much impact you think it will have versus how much net revenue will have versus how much effort it is? Because the extreme example would be, okay, well, let me turn on the faucet for localization for every single country that
Yeah.
exists, and
Yeah.
willingness to pay for every single country. But obviously, maybe that makes sense for, I don't know, a Facebook or like a billion
Yeah.
user platform. But if you only have 50 customers, it obviously makes no sense. So how do you figure out when to expand and how much to expand, how much to localize, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think there is a perfect answer. There are lots of ways you can go about doing this. A common way that I've seen companies thinking about this is like a tiering approach, which I've spoken about in other podcasts and webinars as well before, which is like thinking about your markets in different tiers. So your tier one markets might be markets where you're going to go full market entry and deep localization. And tier two markets, you might do partial localization, and tier three is just no go. It might not be worth the sort of effort from a depth of localization required to be successful in that market. So when I think of like a tier one approach, if I'm in the US, right, I might think, okay, what are the markets that have high revenue potential in terms of they represent a meaningful amount of addressable market opportunity, but might have a relatively low barrier to localization. So I might go, okay, from the US, the UK makes a ton of sense because A, there's no language localization to be done because I'm already in an English speaking country. And B, it's a G7 country. It has a big e-commerce market. There's lots of buyers there who are willing to pay for a product. And C, the comfort level of a British customer engaging with a US based company is pretty common. Most Brits are pretty comfortable engaging in business with their US counterparts. So you sort of go, okay, listen, the potential is high and the barriers are low. So that's
Yeah.
a great
Yeah.
formula to
Low
think of.
effort, high impact. Let's do
Exactly.
it.
Like
Yeah.
very similar to how you prioritize a product roadmap, right?
Yeah.
To your point. And then you think about uh, what are the things you have to do, compliance and regulation. There's a little bit of work to do there, maybe. Local payment methods and currencies. Cards are generally fine. So there's not a ton of change required from a payment methods offered perspective. No change required from a language perspective. You need to deploy GBP perhaps and set up a merchant account there. If you're using a product like Paddle, you don't need to do that. It's even easier. But there's not a lot of change required to your go-to-market strategy. You can probably deploy pretty similar positioning and messaging. Again, it's sort of a first world English speaking country, so most of that is relatively synonymous. So if you again, I'm just talking through like the logic that's going off inside my head around why that's like high impact, low effort.
Yeah.
And then you might, and what is quite common, you might put Australia and New Zealand in that bucket as well. Again, there are some more, perhaps a few more challenges there. The market's nowhere near as big. There's not much time zone compatibility. So if you have a support team and you're
Right.
relatively early stage, you need to cover another time zone. So there are those sorts of things to go through. But I think the way I encourage SaaS founders to think about it is like looking through a bunch of parameters and a bunch of sort of factors that impact the level of effort of the level of effort to localize and the potential impact, and then grouping those countries into sort of tier one, tier two, tier three, and then approaching like that and thinking about it in a similar way to how you sort of prioritize a product roadmap.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it's you're still guessing, right? But you're making
Yeah.
educated guesses about how much impact do you think it is, how much effort do you think it is, and then you're doing clustering to say, okay, well, these are the ones that we think we'll prioritize ahead of these. And yeah, I mean, it's very similar to a product roadmap. Is
Yeah.
there a particular like getting started point, whether it's you have X amount of revenue, you should start thinking about expanding globally. your first step is to just be available in all markets and then look at the data and see where your sales are coming from. And then maybe if you get a bunch of sales from
Yep.
France, then start localizing there. And but is it like, or should I do it from day one because it's just so easy? Like when should a SaaS founder start thinking about doing any level of
Yep.
being available in other markets, and then on top of that, localization?
Great question. I think it varies depending on where you are. Now, a US based founder, typically based on what we see, US companies are able to grow to a much larger size with a focus, with a purely domestic focus, because the US market is so big, right? So the US market compared to the Australian market is big enough to build a pretty meaningful SaaS company with 100% of your focus on the US market itself. Now, if you take Australia as an example, Australia is less than a tenth the size of the US in terms of like the size of that market. So probably about a 15th of the size. So it's a tiny market in comparison. So SaaS founders in Australia are much more likely to want to expand and go international a bit more quickly because they need to in order to grow their businesses. And then you look at Europe, and you have the European Union, which gives you access to sort of a broader European market early doors, and the Eurozone, which helps with Europe. So, European founders typically go global a little bit, well, go European wide a little bit more early than other markets do. I think generally it's also language dependent, right? It's easier for a company in an English speaking market to expand or be present globally because English is the international sort of language of business. And so being present around the world in English is something you can do. I mean, you can just sell in USD in English all around the world and you will acquire customers. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting you can't do it that way. But that is a great way to sort of test appetite in different markets, see where demand for your product is, and then choose to localize that way. So I think in terms of like stage of company as to when they would sort of up their localization efforts very much depends on A, where they are, and B, their ambition. And in markets like the US, we see it a little bit later than in markets like Australia and probably the UK. But I would encourage people to be present in markets pretty early doors and use that as a way to gauge interest for your product and your solution.
Makes sense. It's kind of like confirm the logical. I mean, you've been in the space. You've been building with Paddle. You've built a SaaS company yourself. So, but it's broadly intuitive, right? It's like start, and then if you start tapping on your market, then maybe expand. But if you're in the US, there's a broader addressable market, and kind of keep going there.
We did that, right? So when I started my SaaS company in Australia, we were.
And what was your company? Just give a little context maybe on that.
Sure. So we were a multilingual customer support platform for tourism companies. So it was a product that was integrated with a bunch of different travel products and surfaced sort of travel itineraries and recommendations to customers in many different languages. So we targeted sort of.
Guessing this is before LLMs.
Yeah, exactly. This was before then. Yeah. But we targeted medium-sized travel companies that didn't have the resource to support multilingual customer support teams, yet had very international customer base. So think like mid-sized hotel chains across Europe, right? And that was our sweet spot. And we were selling to a bunch of folks over in Europe in this space. And the catalyst for us moving from Australia to Europe was market size, right? Like we got some early traction. Yeah, we got some early traction in Australia. But in order to really expand the opportunity, we knew that we had to be in a much bigger tourism market with better tourism infrastructure. And so we got a great opportunity and moved to Paris. And we still served our customers in Australia, don't get me wrong, but we sort of opened up that market for us. And went about localizing our offering in France, which was super challenging. We encountered all sorts of difficulties and learned a lot along the way. But yeah, that was the catalyst for us. It was market opportunity.
Same exact thing that we've been talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like every conversation I have has to devolve into AI at some point. So let's just go there. I mean, maybe let's just leave it open to start. You're in the payment space. You're working with Paddle, which is one of the largest merchant of records payment systems out there.
Yeah.
Are you either seeing things emerge that are interesting trends or insights or are you building things that you think will shift how we transact online? And again, that's a super broad topic, but I'm
That's
curious
a
kind
very
of
broad topic.
what is interesting? What is something that maybe I haven't heard or thought about that you being deeply in this space might have unique insight to?
Um, that is a great question. I think we're doing more of the former than we are the latter at the moment. We're definitely thinking about how AI can make our product better through the
Hmm.
lens of how can we use AI technology to provide value to our customers. We're not thinking about it through the lens of like, let's just throw AI into the product, but it's very much how can we solve problems for our customers. We are seeing shifts in billing models and changes in pricing models because AI companies are pricing differently, much more consumption-based pricing. But actually, I think the most interesting thing I've heard, if because I think it's interesting, was a conversation I had maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago with the founders of a company called Stig, which are a super interesting company. Um,
Spell
and
it.
we were talking, we were Stig, Stigg,
Okay.
um, and we were talking about, we were just having a conversation, and we were talking about agentic billing, which is the
Mm.
idea that AI agents will bill each other for the work that they
Eh,
do, and the impact that that will have on things like API design. So how you have to design things like rate limiting and that sort of stuff into APIs to basically allow machines to transact with each other. I think that's fascinating. I think we're still very, very early days in that world, but I think some of these things are starting to pop into my mind, and that's a super recent one as to how AI will start to transform the way that payments are executed around the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. So maybe to completely derail this conversation, but I've been thinking a lot about. I do believe that we're going to exist in a world where each person has at least one AI, one agent, whatever you want to call it, that
Yep.
represents them and their interests. I think companies will have the same, and maybe you'll have an army, maybe you'll have a chief of staff that manages a bunch of agents that work for you. But I was thinking specifically about Lucas agent talking to Elijah agent, and rather than you and I emailing and saying, "Let's find a time. Here's my Calendly link," it will just be I'll voice dictate or I'll call my agent, right? Or I'll text my agent because I'll be able to communicate with any platform. I'll say,
Yep.
"Hey, can you schedule time with Lucas? Reach out to his agent, see when he's available, and then, schedule something." And so they will
Yeah.
be talking to each other autonomously
Sure.
for low-level things of scheduling. But I think the introduction of payments as well and transacting is very interesting. Where does that where did that conversation go in terms of uh, I don't know. I haven't thought about it. So, how
Yeah. I mean,
would you transact via two agents interacting with each other within a construct that makes sense? Obviously, we don't want my agents scamming you and ripping you off, and maybe it's more of a company to company transaction
precisely.
that's starting to start first. But yeah, what's it look like?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know where it's we're still. I think it's all just ideas at this point, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
things that could evolve and emerge. But you think like, is there a world where those agents can bill each other based on some sort of value metric, right?
Yeah.
That we're tracking in the background without human intervention, or is
Mhm.
there some is there a stage before that that actually requires a human intervention? So, for example, your agent does some work for me, and you submit an invoice to my agent or something, and then my agent pings me via some sort of platform and says, "Hey Lucas, this invoice just came through from Elijah's agent for work XYZ. Do you approve the invoice?" And I hit a button, and then suddenly the agent goes off and, I don't know, calls an API or accesses some sort of banking infrastructure to go and execute the payment that has been requested by your agent. Like that might be the step that we see sooner. But then
Yeah.
eventually maybe there's a set of rules where the agents can just bill each other and it actually doesn't require me to intervene or approve. And there's sort of API flexibility that enables that to become a reality as long as we'd agreed on some terms, on some value metric that you're going to deliver X, and my agent has the ability to validate whether you have delivered X. And then, I've got an empowered agent who can go and make that payment based on their assessment of the provision of value, right? If that's quantified in a database, I think that is easier. If it's not, then I think that's harder. But I think there are so many directions in which that could go, and I don't think we're super far away from that sort of thing being a reality. Like I don't think it's I don't think it's 4 or 5 years away. I think it's much sooner than that, where this starts happening and we start to think about, hang on, how can a set of payment APIs be used by a set of sort of AI agents in an automated way?
I think it's really interesting too, because you start getting into division of labor, basically. So right now, I could go onto Upwork or Fiverr or whatever, a freelancing website, and I could hire someone to, edit my podcast. I could hire someone else to go find me guests. I could hire someone else to do my graphics
Yeah.
for the thumbnails. And, and maybe I could build an agent to go do 3 agents to go do those things, but maybe someone else has already built an agent to go do those tasks, right? And they've put a bunch of prompt engineering into it, and they've hooked into different APIs. And so just even if we just remove my agent from the equation, and I just
Mhm.
go to a marketplace and I say I'm going to hire Lucas AI to evaluate my localization. How good is my strategy? Lucas AI is going to do a bit of consulting work, and then he'll send me an invoice, or Lucas AI will send me an invoice. And then
Yeah,
maybe at some point I just ask my agent to go do that. Right. I mean, that's what we're talking about. And the
totally.
benefit too is, if Lucas, you start doing that consulting work, well, you have to charge, hundreds of dollars an hour because you only have 24 hours a day. But if you have a 80% as good as you AI version of you that you've trained, you've fine-tuned, you've tweaked, you've modeled
Mhm.
out, then I can trust that agent because, well, it's your creation, and the buck stops with you, and
Yeah.
it's going to be just as good, but you can bill it to 100,000 people with no impact. So the cost can be 90% cheaper than if you were to do it yourself. Value
Absolutely.
creation. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, value creation, it's amazing, isn't it? Who
Yeah.
knows where we'll end up?
Yeah. I love this stuff. I could just geek out all the time. In terms of how you guys at Paddle are thinking about it, you mentioned
Yeah,
you're looking to create value for your customers, for the people using your platform.
yeah.
What does that look like right now, or is it still early days and you're exploring, playing, figuring out?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of things that we're looking at. Um, I think there is. I'll preface this by saying that the definition of AI, especially when it comes to assessing technology, is relatively loose. So we already do quite a lot of sophisticated rules based, sort of data driven types of work inside the platform that
Fraud
some people
detection,
would
I
coin as,
imagine, is a big
yeah,
one.
exactly, and like payment routing, for example.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think there's a bunch of things that come under the umbrella of like sort of sophisticated technology, that is somewhat using a component of machine learning, and if we're talking in very broad terms around AI, then I think we can roll it into that somewhat. But like, are we deploying sort of LLMs and that sort of
Yeah, I
stuff
guess
across the
LLM would be
product?
the, yeah.
Exactly. At this point, not really. But what we are thinking about is personalized pricing and dynamic pricing. I think is really interesting. So being able to
On the
corroborate,
individual level, or broader than
I
that?
think both on like a segment level as well as an individual level, perhaps. So thinking about sort of corroborating revenue data or pricing data with behavioral data or with sort of buying intent data, and being able to use that data to dynamically price based on buying intent of a particular buyer or product behavior or usage behavior or that sort of stuff. So I think there's a bunch of work that we're thinking about around sort of personalized pricing and dynamic pricing. Um, we're also thinking about churn and retention as well. Retain is a product that is in paddle. So retain is a component of our product, which helps customers prevent churn through a variety of interventions. And we're thinking about how AI can help us predict when customers might churn and how we can intervene in that sort of process to prevent churn, and improve retention rates for customers. To your point, we're thinking about fraud as well. Something that we've been doing for a while at Paddle, which I probably wouldn't call AI in the interest of not sort of AI washing, but is payment orchestration and payment routing. This has been around for quite some time now. So as a merchant of record, we directly integrate at a PSP level, or a payment gateway level. So under the hood of Paddle, we're integrated with Stripe and Checkout and WellPay and PayPal and other payment gateways.
Processors.
And we use data to orchestrate payments to the gateway that they're most likely to succeed with, because different gateways have different performance based on regionality and other bits of data. So, thinking about payment routing at a more sophisticated level, I think is really interesting for us. Um, I think there's something also around like using AI to help with forecasting. So taking a data set and using that data set to forecast or predict outcomes in the future, that I think we will see embedded into a product like Paddle in the future. So there are a few examples of how we're thinking about using AI technology inside of Paddle to help our customers better grow and operate their businesses. I think broadly at the moment, like our vision for Paddle is very much to be a growth partner. I think a lot of people, or I get payments is typically considered by most as like an operational partner, like a bit of a back office requirement. Like I need to have a payments platform in order to capture sales across
It
the
just needs
world.
to work.
And
I
it's
don't
true.
need to think more about it.
Exactly. And I think AI is going to help companies like Paddle and others in the payment space really shift from being an operational partner or something that sits in the operational decision layer to being a strategic partner and something that sits at the strategic decision layer inside a business. Because we fundamentally believe that we help our customers grow their companies, right? If you deploy Paddle correctly, like Paddle is a growth lever. Payments can be a growth lever. We can help increase your revenue through a lot of the stuff we spoke about before around localization is one way we do that. But another way that we might do that in the future is using data to help you price, right? Is to be automatically running sort of pricing A/B tests in the background and using data inputs to then decide where to surface prices and at what price to set. So I think there's a bunch of use cases for AI and payments that are going to you will see these things, by the way. These are all things that are on whiteboards and in documents inside Paddle at the moment that we're thinking about. And yeah, I'm really excited about like our vision, very much like executing on that vision, which is to help SaaS companies grow their companies.
I love talking with product people because the answer you gave is we're building things that help people. And maybe AI is a tool that helps that. And maybe, LLMs might be a tool that's in there. And also, it might not be the most relevant. But regardless, you're going to focus on driving value for your customers. And so, like, yeah, of course, there's going to be a mix of machine learning and LLMs maybe somewhere show up, and then also just traditional software and features. But that's the whole point. It's not about let me just have a screwdriver strategy and go put a screwdriver in everything because that's the best new cool tool that showed up. It's, well, this is a new tool. Where does it make sense? And for certain businesses and segments and markets, it might make more sense, right? If you're B2C and you're directly working with, I don't know, you text and you want text summarization, LLM is an amazing use case and you should put that in as a feature. But if you're a payment platform, it may be more of machine learning and kind of the traditional AI algorithmic type approaches might be more useful, but you're still exploring all of it. So anyway, I love the product perspective. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. And you're right. Our data set is numbers. It's not words, right?
Yeah.
So, LLMs are probably limited in their ability to solve customer problems, for a company like Paddle, but you're spot on, right? Like we think about all of this through the lens of what is the problem that we want to solve for our customers and what is the best use of technology to solve that problem. Like that's the starting point. It's problem first, technology second. Problem first, solution second. In other words, and whatever technology is out there. And sorry, the great thing about AI is that we have more technology available to us to use and to pick from to go and best solve customer problems. But the focus is never on the technology. The focus is on what customer problems are we solving and how are we driving value to our customers. And the technology best suited to do that is the technology we'll choose. So we're not rushing at all to embed AI in every corner. It's only when it solves a real problem. And we're very confident that there are lots of problems that we can solve with it. But it's a matter of prioritizing those problems and making sure, we're making the right decisions for our customers and for us as a business.
100%. Lucas, close us out here. If you had one piece of advice for a founder that's listening, they have a business, they're doing, they're generating revenue, they're thinking, when should I expand globally? What would be just the one thing that they should look at, do, explore tomorrow?
Thinking about expanding globally, I think I would go through the tiering exercise. I think I would identify your tier one markets. I don't think you need to worry about mapping the entire world and grouping all however many countries there are into tier one, tier two, tier three. I think choosing what are the 4 or 5 markets that makes most sense, where you've got highest impact for lowest effort, and focus on them as a starting point, is what I'd say.
Wonderful. Thanks for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Elijah. Great to be here.
If you enjoyed that episode, make sure you check out this video right here. And if you really enjoyed it and you listened to the end, take 2 seconds and share the love so someone else might find it by clicking the thumbs up button and subscribing. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. But click that button.